They say the modern man is drowning, not in battle, but in noise. His enemies are no longer soldiers, but screens. His sword replaced by distraction. His spirit dulled by comfort. There was once a system, forged in the temples of fire and silence, known as the Tao of Iron. It was not about muscle nor violence, but focus. A discipline so pure that even fear bowed before it. In a mountain monastery forgotten by time, a young man once sought this path. He was restless, haunted by the weight of his own thoughts. The master saw his eyes and whispered, "You have the strength of a warrior, but the mind of a storm. To walk the Tao of Iron, you must first silence the wind within." This is his journey. Through discipline and doubt, through solitude and awakening. A story not of conquest, but of inner warfare, where every strike is against the self. Because the greatest warrior is not the one who conquers others, but the one who masters his attention. Chapter 1. The Storm Within. The mountain greeted him not with warmth, but with wind. Sharp, cold air cut through his robe, as if testing the resolve that brought him here. Far below, the world hummed with noise, markets, voices, and restless hearts chasing fleeting meaning. Up here, silence ruled like an ancient god. He bowed before the monastery gates, weathered by centuries of snow and prayer. A monk opened them without a word, his eyes calm, unshaken. The young man entered, carrying nothing but the ache of confusion and the hunger to master it. Days passed before he even met the master. He spent his hours sweeping the courtyard, hauling water, eating in silence. He thought discipline meant action. Yet here, inaction was the test. His thoughts screamed louder than the wind outside. "Why won't they teach me?" he muttered to himself. "Because you haven't learned to listen," a voice replied. The master stood behind him, tall, serene, carved from years of stillness. His eyes were deep, the kind that reflected a man's hidden chaos back at him. "You seek control," the master said, "but control is a chain disguised as strength. You cannot command the storm until you understand its language." He led the student to a small stone cell. No speaking, no writing, no training, only silence. The door shut behind him like the closing of a lifetime. At first, the young man meditated with the eagerness of ambition. He straightened his spine, breathed deeply, recited lessons he had read in books. But the mind, unchained, became wild. Memories, doubts, fears, all came rushing in. Voices of failure whispered. Faces from his past mocked him. The silence became unbearable. By the third day, his chest tightened, as if he were drowning in thought. He tried to fight his mind, force it quiet, but it only screamed louder. He punched the wall until his knuckles bled. "Why can't I stop this?" he shouted into the void. From outside, the master's voice drifted like wind through paper walls. "Because you are still trying to win." The words struck deeper than any blade. That night, the young man sat trembling in the dark. His mind was chaos, storms of regret, waves of fear, but exhaustion softened him. He no longer resisted. He simply watched the thoughts rise and fall. He breathed with them, not controlling, not fighting, just witnessing. For the first time, the storm began to quiet. In that stillness, he understood. Discipline was not domination, it was surrender. The art of letting what is simply be. Modern psychology calls this metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe one's thoughts without drowning in them. The monks had mastered this, long before science gave it a name. When morning came, the master opened the door. He looked at the young man's eyes, tired but calm. "Good," he said softly. "Now, you have begun to see the wind within." The young man bowed deeply. For the first time, he did not crave instruction or approval. He only felt presence, raw and clean, like snow on stone. And so began his journey, not to control the mind, but to walk beside it in peace. The master watched the dawn light on the mountains and said, "Now we teach your hands what your heart has begun to learn." Chapter 2. The Weight of Stillness. Dawn bled slowly across the peaks, a soft fire awakening stone. The air was sharp, the kind that bit the lungs and burned away dreams. The master waited in the courtyard, standing beside a single wooden bowl filled to the brim with water. The young man approached, bowing low. "Today," the master said, "you will climb the mountain path. At the summit, you will find a small shrine. You will place this bowl upon its stone altar without spilling a drop." The student blinked. "That's all?" The master's gaze hardened. "That is everything." He handed him the bowl and turned away. No further words. The path wound upward through jagged cliffs and whispering pines. At first, the young man moved quickly, confident, but within minutes, the surface of the water began to tremble. His breath grew uneven. Every gust of wind threatened to spill it. His body wanted to rush, but his purpose demanded patience. He slowed. Focus narrowed to a single point, the trembling surface. One slip of attention and the entire task would fail. The world outside faded. No thoughts of time, no self, no ambition. Only breath, balance, and the subtle conversation between motion and stillness. Halfway up, fatigue crept in. His arms ached. The temptation to rest whispered like a devil, "Just stop." Just one break, but he heard the master's words echo through the wind. "Discipline is not what you do when it's easy. It is what you do when your mind begs you to stop." He pressed on. Each step became deliberate, a meditation of movement. His breath matched his pace, like a metronome for awareness. Slowly, something shifted. The weight of the bowl no longer felt like burden. It became teacher. Every tremor mirrored the state of his own mind. When he grew tense, the water shook. When he softened, it stilled. The climb turned into revelation. He reached the summit as the sky glowed. The sky burned orange. The shrine waited, small, humble, carved into the rock. Kneeling, he placed the bowl upon the altar. Not a single drop had been lost. For a moment, he felt nothing but the silence of success. Then, something deeper, a stillness inside that matched the calm surface of the water. The master appeared behind him, as if born from the wind itself. "You carried more than water," he said. "You carried your own mind. Now you see, to focus is not to tighten, but to align." The student bowed. His arms trembled, but his heart was steady. Neuroscientists might call this flow state, a merging of action and awareness, where effort disappears and only presence remains. But the monks understood it differently. They called it Wu Wei, effortless action, the paradox of stillness within movement. The master touched the bowl gently. When your attention no longer wavers, even chaos obeys you. Stillness is not the absence of motion, but the mastery of it. As they descended, the wind howled once more. Yet this time, it did not disturb him. He walked with quiet precision, every step a reflection of the water he carried within. At the base of the path, the master looked at him and said, Now, you have steadied your hands. But a warrior must also steady his heart. The student bowed again, his breath calm as stone. He did not yet know what awaited him, only that the silence of the mountain had become his greatest ally. That night, the master whispered under the lantern's glow, "Tomorrow you will leave the monastery, and in the forest's silence, your true fear will finally speak." Chapter 3. The Fear of Emptiness. The morning came without ceremony. Mist hung low over the valley, swallowing the temple in white silence. The master stood at the gate, holding nothing. No food, no torch, no tool, only a command. "You will go into the forest," he said. "For 7 days you will not speak. You will not make fire. You will not seek comfort. You will meet the part of you that trembles when there is nothing left to hold." The young man bowed, though his pulse quickened. "What am I to learn there?" The master's eyes softened. "That emptiness is not your enemy. It is your mirror." And with that, the gates closed behind him. The forest was alive, but it spoke in a language of whispers. Branches groaned with the weight of memory. Birds called distantly, vanishing into the fog. Every sound felt amplified, every silence deeper. At first, he moved with confidence. He had endured isolation before, he thought. But as dusk fell and the shadows grew long, the stillness became a weight pressing against his chest. By the second night, he began to feel hunted. Not by beasts, but by thoughts. Each creak of the trees was a voice from within. "You're not strong enough. You're wasting your life. You will fail, as you always have." He tried to meditate, but the mind rebelled, conjuring faces, regrets, and echoes of every unfinished dream. The forest became a mirror, reflecting every fear he had buried beneath ambition. On the third night, a storm broke. Rain slicing through the canopy like shards of glass. He shivered beneath a fallen tree, soaked, exhausted, mind unraveling. For a fleeting moment, he wanted to run. Back to the monastery, back to warmth, back to someone telling him what to do. But a voice within whispered, "You've run all your life. Stay." He sat upright, back against the bark, and closed his eyes. The rain drummed against his skin, relentless, rhythmic. He breathed with it. He no longer resisted the discomfort. He let the cold pierce him, the fear move through him. In that surrender, something changed. The noise, the panic, began to fade. The forest, once oppressive, now breathed with him. The rhythm of rain became his heartbeat. The wind no longer threatened, it spoke. He felt no separation between himself and the world, just motion and awareness, nature observing itself. As dawn broke on the 7th day, the storm cleared. The air was sharp, new. He sat beneath a cedar tree, his body weak but his gaze steady. The master appeared from between the trees, silent as mist. He looked at the young man, drenched, hollow-eyed, but calm. "What did you find?" he asked. The student smiled faintly. "Nothing." The master nodded. "Then you have found everything." He knelt beside him. Most men build walls of noise to hide from emptiness. They fill their days with chatter, their minds with endless doing, fearing the silence between breaths. But silence, my son, is not absence. It is the forge where the spirit is reforged. The student bowed, tears mixing with the rain still clinging to his face. He understood now that fear thrives only in resistance. When met with stillness, it dissolves, revealing what has always been beneath: clarity, Modern science calls this exposure therapy, facing the source of anxiety until the brain learns peace in its presence. The ancients called it the purification of silence. The master placed a hand on his shoulder. You have faced the void and lived. Now we return to the temple to shape this emptiness into strength. And together they walked out of the forest, the student reborn, not through victory, but through surrender. That evening, as the sun died over the peaks, the master whispered, "Tomorrow, we forge the fire that will temper what remains." Chapter 4. The Fire of Discipline. The forge of transformation is not built of iron. It is built of repetition, the kind that burns the weakness from the soul, not the muscle from the flesh. When the student returned, his eyes were quieter, his step more grounded, but the master saw it, the flicker of complacency that comes after peace. And so, he began the next phase. Before the sun rose, the master's voice echoed through the monastery courtyard. Begin. Every morning began the same. Sword in hand, body low, motion flowing through air, thick with mist. Strike, breathe, step, strike, breathe, step. No words, no correction, only rhythm. At first, the student's movements were wild, chasing perfection, fighting fatigue. But as the hours passed, he noticed how impatience broke his form, how tension distorted his flow. Every time he sought power, precision fled. Every time he forced mastery, the sword rebelled. The master observed silently, his expression unreadable. When the student finally collapsed, trembling and gasping, the master said only, "Discipline is not in the strike. It is in the space between them." The words haunted him. That night, as the fire cracked in the meditation hall, he replayed each motion in his mind. He realized the truth. He had been trying to win against fatigue instead of understand it. He had turned discipline into punishment rather than devotion. So, the next morning, he began again. Strike, breathe, step. This time, he didn't fight the pain. He moved with it. He felt the trembling as part of the rhythm. Every inhale became sharper, every exhale cleaner. The sword no longer felt heavy. It felt alive, an extension of his pulse, his thought, his silence. The master approached. "Now," he said, "you are not swinging a sword. You are swinging your awareness." Days bled into weeks. His muscles hardened, but his mind softened. He rose before dawn, trained until dusk, meditated until the stars vanished into morning. The cycle repeated until time itself disappeared. Through exhaustion, the ego dissolved. He no longer asked when he would be done, because there was no end, only the path. One night, during his seated meditation, he felt a flicker inside, not of fire, but of clarity. His mind observed his body from a still distance, as if awareness and action had merged. Every breath aligned with heartbeat, every heartbeat aligned with intention. The Tao of Iron was no longer something he pursued. It was something he remembered. The master smiled when he saw him move at dawn. The way his sword cut the mist, effortless, soundless. Each swing now carried the silence of 1,000 failed ones. He said quietly, "Discipline is the fire that burns away illusion. You have burned well." Modern science might call this neuroplasticity, the brain reshaping itself through repetition, carving focus into the flesh. But for the monks, it was the alchemy of the soul. That evening, the master led him to the mountain's edge. The valley below glowed beneath the last light. "Do you see the fire in the distance?" the master asked. The student nodded. "That is the world. Restless, consuming, never still. Soon you will return to it. But before you do, you must temper your fire with steel. Discipline without direction is destruction." The student bowed, the weight of his training settling like armor upon his spirit. He was no longer chasing mastery. He was mastery, forged by struggle, shaped by silence, cooled by awareness. The master placed his hand on the sword's hilt and whispered, "Tomorrow, we will test not your strength, but your mind." Chapter 5. The Iron Mind. Dawn stretched across the courtyard in slow gold. The air was colder than usual, sharp with something unspoken. The student rose, as always, before the bell. He had expected another morning of strikes and meditation. But when he entered the training yard, the master was already there, barefoot, silent, and holding a sword. The student bowed deeply. "Master, shall I begin?" The old man's voice carried the calm weight of thunder. "Today, you will strike me." The student froze. He thought he misheard. "Strike? You?" The master nodded. "With everything you have." Without hesitation, the student's grip tightened. 1,000 lessons screamed within him. Control your temper. Respect your teacher. Do not harm without purpose. His chest filled with conflict. "I can't," he said finally. The master's gaze narrowed. "Then you have learned nothing." He raised his blade, pointing to the student's heart. "Your sword is sharp. Your form is true. But your mind," he stepped forward, "still wavers like smoke." The courtyard fell silent except for the whisper of wind between pine branches. The student exhaled. He drew his blade. Steel kissed the air. He circled slowly. Every instinct battled within him. The will to obey, the fear of disrespect, the shadow of doubt. The master did not move. He stood as still as a mountain. "Strike!" the old man roared. The student lunged, fast, focused, but pulled back an inch too soon. The master parried effortlessly and struck the ground beside him. The shock of the impact rippled through his bones. "You hesitate," the master said, "because your mind still divides the world, right and wrong, safe and dangerous, teacher and foe. That division is the root of all fear." He raised the sword again. "Iron without purpose is just metal. Purpose without clarity is chaos." The student steadied his breath. The world narrowed to the space between them. The mountain wind brushed his skin, carrying the scent of cedar and ash. He could hear his heartbeat, slow, steady. He closed his eyes for a single breath, and when he opened them, everything was clear. No master, no student, no past or future, only the strike. He moved. The sound was like silk tearing through air. The blade stopped an inch from the master's throat. Perfect stillness. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then the master smiled. "Now, you understand." He lowered his sword, the faintest glint of approval in his eyes. "Focus is not aggression. It is awareness shaped by purpose. The warrior does not strike to destroy. He strikes to reveal." The student bowed deeply, trembling, not from fatigue, but from revelation. He realized now that every battle he had fought was not against his opponent, but against his own hesitation, his own division, his own mind. The Tao of Iron was never about the sword. It was about the stillness behind the blade, the unwavering presence that cuts through confusion, ego, and fear. The master looked toward the horizon. Your training here is finished, but the path never ends. The world below waits for you, loud and lost. You will walk among them, unseen, carrying silence like a sword. The student nodded. His eyes held no pride, no hunger, only peace. Modern neuroscience might call this integrated cognition, when emotion, reason, and action merge into one fluid intelligence. The monks had no such term. They called it simply the iron mind. The master turned away, voice fading into the mountain wind. Now go, warrior. Let silence teach the world what words never could. Chapter 6. The Return to the World. Years passed. The mountain remained unchanged, eternal and unmoved. But the young man who once arrived trembling at its gates now walked down its stone path with the calm of water. He carried no sword, no scroll, no sign of mastery, only presence, invisible, but felt in every step. Below, the world roared with life. Markets cried, carriages rattled, people hurried through the dust, their minds pulled by invisible threads of desire and distraction. It was the same world he had once fled, but it felt entirely different. He stood at the edge of the village and simply watched. Children laughed, merchants shouted, lovers argued in the street. Yet within him, not a ripple stirred. The chaos that once conquered his focus now flowed through him without disturbance. A boy bumped into him and spilled fruit onto the ground. The young man, now the warrior, bent down, gathered each piece gently, and smiled. The boy bowed, embarrassed, and ran off. No words, just stillness woven into action. He walked to the riverbank where he had once sat as a child, consumed by confusion about his life's direction. The river hadn't changed, but now he understood what the master had meant. Life flows where attention goes. He watched the current, fast, chaotic, unstoppable. Yet beneath the surface, the water was calm, moving with perfect precision. So too was the mind of a warrior, still beneath the storm. As he sat in silence, people began to gather. Something in his stillness drew them. A farmer, exhausted from his field, asked softly, "How do you sit so peacefully in all this noise?" He looked up, smiled faintly, and said, "Because the noise is only outside." The man blinked, puzzled. Yet something in the simplicity of the answer lingered. The warrior spent days there, not teaching through sermons or philosophy, but through example. He helped rebuild a broken wall, carrying stones with deliberate care. He shared food with those in need. When conflict rose between two villagers, his presence alone dissolved their anger. His silence taught louder than words ever could. This was the final revelation of the Tao of Iron. That mastery was never meant to be confined to temples or mountains. It belonged in the marketplace, in the noise, in the chaos of living. To be disciplined is not to escape the world, but to move through it untouched. Modern minds might call it embodied awareness. When focus lives, not just in meditation, but in motion, in speech, in every ordinary act. The ancients had a simpler word: being. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, he looked west, where the mountain peaks cut the sky in half. He could almost hear the master's voice in the wind. The path does not end at the gate. It begins wherever you stand. He smiled, bowed deeply toward the distant monastery, and whispered, "Thank you for teaching me to see." The wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and the faint echo of a bell. He stood, straightened his posture, and walked back into the village. Each step silent, precise, and alive. The world still shouted, but now he heard only rhythm, the same rhythm he had found in silence, in storms, in swords. The Tao of Iron had become his breath, his gaze, his life. He was no longer the seeker, he was the path, core, moral. The path of the warrior is not to conquer the world, but to master the attention that creates it. Finale. The way continues. In the end, the warrior learned that strength was never in the sword, but in the silence that holds it steady. Discipline wasn't about control, it was about harmony. Fear wasn't the enemy, it was the teacher. And focus. Focus was the thread that stitched his soul back into the moment. The Tao of Iron isn't hidden in temples or mountains. It lives in you, in every breath before you react, in every pause before you speak, in every choice to stay still when the world pulls you apart. If this story awakens something quiet inside you, a spark, a reminder, a call, then don't let it fade.